For us, everything was very difficult and new. We have always respected our parents. The battle for my son lasted 8 years. From today on, your God is also my God. I was 12 years old when we had to leave Croatia because of the war. We returned to Serbia, where we originally came from, but this return was anything but easy. Our family didn't really take us in, and we faced many challenges. Where and how should we go on? Eventually, a family took us in, and we lived in Bejic near Novi Sad for a year. This family took care of us, but after a year, they faced many problems and could no longer support us, so we had to leave their home. However, we remained very good friends. We then lived for 3 years in a house near a barracks in Ruma. After that, my father was able to start a business similar to the one he ran in Croatia. From that point on, everything became much easier. My father quickly became quite successful in his business. However, during this time, we children couldn't live with our parents. Eventually, our paternal grandmother took us in, and we stayed with her until our parents were earning well. They then invested in a house in this village, where I still live today. It wasn't ideal and wasn't easy to move so often, but somehow we adapted to this new situation. Later, I took over my father's business. I have a younger and an older sister. My older sister is already a grandmother. My parents did everything they could to support us in our education. However, in the end, only my sisters managed to complete their schooling. Our family always emphasized respect for parents and, above all, for the older generations. We always respected and practiced that. At that time, we lived in an environment where parents had the right to guide and raise us, and we were expected to respect that. I still remember it was my mother who first saw my wife. At first glance, she loved her and suggested I get to know her. When I saw Jasmina, something happened. At that time, I didn't know anything about God. I had spent a lot of money on things that weren't good, so perhaps it was better to accept marrying Jasmina. Today, we've been married for 31 years, have 2 children and 2 grandchildren. I now believe that God brought us together so we could live out the calling He placed in us. At 16, I got married, and at 18, I became a father. At 22, our daughter Alexandra was born. Today, our children have completed their education, have jobs, and live independently. My son takes good care of his own family. I consider this a great success because we managed it despite me not being able to finish school due to the war and other circumstances. My parents had a great influence on us, and we followed the path they had hoped for. Our family also celebrated 2 significant religious holidays that played an essential role for us, especially for my parents. I can't even describe how much they meant to them.
Iskreno nisam bio protiv toga da Jasmina pohađa crkvu, da se druži, to sam tako razumio.
I never really opposed Jasmina attending church and being with the people who preached the gospel to us. But I wasn't truly open to it because, for me, the religious holidays my parents taught us about always came first.
Te 2 romske slave koje su bile za nas veoma važne u našem životu.
We traveled a lot because we transported goods for various companies. Sometimes, I was so tired I nearly fell asleep while driving. I asked Jasmina to pray for me because I knew how dangerous it was to fall asleep at the wheel. After that, it never happened again. When we had goods that needed to sell quickly, I also asked Jasmina to pray for us to make a profit. That was the first time I felt something begin to stir within me. When I started taking things more seriously in the third year, our son suddenly fell ill. One day, he went swimming, and as he came out of the water, we noticed lumps forming on his body. We were horrified and didn't know what was happening.
Uplašili smo se, nismo znali šta se dešava I od tog momenta sam na neki način...
From that moment, I started seeking God. The battle with my son's illness lasted 8 years. We tried everything possible, but no one knew what was really wrong. Even the doctors couldn't explain it until he turned 11. The illness had spread rapidly, and the doctors told us there was no hope for him and that we should take him home. At that moment, Jasmina and my mother asked me to go to church and pray for him. But I couldn't accept that back then. I couldn't think of a church, only that my son might die. I didn't know how to go on. One day, my brother-in-law from my older sister came to visit me at the hospital. This was when we received the diagnosis that our son no longer had any chance of survival. He asked me if I had any money. I told him that we had spent everything we had over the past 8 years on his treatment. He then said to me, "There is a man who can save your child." I asked who this man was. He replied, "Jesus Christ." I was furious and said, "Are you crazy? Don't you see my child is dying, and you're telling me a story?" He said it wouldn't cost me anything and urged me to come and see people praying for my son. Reluctantly, I went with him to a church called the Community of Light in Leskovac, right in the city center. The pastor already knew we were coming to have prayers for my son. I felt somewhat forced to go because surgery was planned for that day. The doctor had suggested removing all lymph nodes as a last resort to give him a chance at survival. At the church, the pastor prayed for my son and then told me, "Jesus Christ has said your son will live." I was completely taken aback and felt lost.
Međutim, nekako su me odvukli u crkvu, tamo se pastor pomolio za njega I onda je došao I rekao mi je, Isus Hrist je rekao da će tvoj sin...
There were about 250 people there, all praying for us and calling out my son's name. It was an incredible feeling of love.
I celo vreme izgovarali Nikola, Nikola. Za mene to bio šok da svi ljudi pokazuju toliku ljubav za mog sina.
I was so confused because the doctors had told us he would soon die. However, the pastor insisted, "The doctors have said this, but Jesus Christ has said your son will live."
Ja sam bio malo izbunjen. Kažem, pa doktori su rekli da će on da umre.
I can't recall everything I replied, but one thing I said was, "If he survives, I will follow Christ for as long as I live."
Ne znam šta sve rekao. Pa dobro, kažem, ako on živi, ja ću da sledim Hrista dok sam živ. Ja sam bio skroz zbunjen, više nisam znao šta pričam.
I was confused and didn't know what to think. When we got home, I undressed Nikola, my son, and saw all the lymph nodes still on his body. I told Jasmina, "That man is lying. He has deceived us." Jasmina calmly replied, "Let's go to Ni and find out if Nikola is all right or if that man is truly lying."
Tamo su nas sačekali doktori I dan danas pamtim njihova imena sva.
The hospital staff were waiting for us. The doctor, whose name I still remember, took our child and started yelling at us, "Where were you on Wednesday? Don't you know we had a surgery planned? Jasmina fainted in the hallway. They took Nicola for tests, and half an hour later, they returned and asked, "What did you do to this child?" I said, "What did we do? We were at church, praying to God." Everyone grew angry and left. We were sent to Dr. Daniela, the hematologist. She brought us to her office and said, "I don't know what you did to this child. We've been treating your son for 8 years and could do nothing. Now you're saying you were at church praying to God. Only God could have helped your son, and now he is healthy." At that moment, I was confused and speechless. I looked at Jasmina, who had often told me about God, and I said, "Today, your God is my God."
Doktorka nas je zamolila da ako hoćemo da tako na nedelju dana čisto da proverimo mog sina.
The doctor asked if we wanted to bring our son back for a checkup in a week to monitor the changes. I said, if necessary, we'll come every day. Of course, we continued to go every Friday for about a month. Nicola's condition kept improving, and since he was 11 years old, he has never been sick again.
Od 11. godine Nikola više nikada nije bio bolestan. Tog momenta kada sam se ja uverio da je mog sina stvarno Bog iscelio.
From that moment, when I was convinced that God had truly healed my son, I started attending church regularly and devoting myself to reading the Bible, just as I had promised the pastor.
Samo je jedno potrebno, ti želiš moju ljubav, više nego djela zakona.
Imao jako dobru podršku od Jasmine, imao sam jako dobru podršku od mojih roditelja.
I had a lot of support from Jasmina and my parents, who allowed me the time to study the Bible.
Nakon 20 godina kako smo se obratili,
Now, 20 years after deciding to follow Jesus, we lead 6 groups and many children's programs.
službe zajedno sa Jasminom. Imamo puno ljudi koji smo krstili, dečicu koju smo doveli.
Together with Jasmina, I conduct services, and we have baptized many people who came to Christ through us.
Naravno da sam nastavio i da radim, ali
My perspective on life changed. I had great role models around me to learn from. I continued working, but learned to balance my time between work and my relationship with God.
Mnoge stvari ranije koje smo radili, shvatio sam da su to stvari koje su
Initially, my focus was solely on continuing my father's business because I believed life was all about prosperity.
Moj fokus je bio da nastavim biznis koji je radio moj otac, posao, da samo gradim, pravim, steknem. Jako sam bio strog.
I was strict with Jasmina and the kids. But God transformed my character.
Stvari u mene obnovio karakter. 2011. godine su me na neki način rukopoložili.
In 2011, I was appointed as the leader of Vineyard here. Since then, my wife and I have taken on this responsibility. At the same time, my parents fell ill and passed away shortly after one another. I had to take over the family business. I worked in Belgrade for several months and then returned home to lead services.
U Beogradu po nekoliko meseci, pa bi dolazio kući da vodim službe. Osjetili smo da za nas to...
We felt this wasn't ideal. I was separated from the church and my family. After much prayer, we felt a clear call from God 3 years ago. It became clear in our hearts, and we decided to give up the business, which was our only source of income.
Prekinemo sa tim poslom. Taj posao nam je bio jedini izvor. Iskreno, najviše se radujem kada se neka osoba obrati. Jer znam koliko je meni bilo teško da prihvatim ono što mi je.
Honestly, my greatest joy is when someone turns to Jesus because I know how hard it was for me to take that step and follow Jasmina's testimony. One of the greatest joys is seeing someone decide to put God first in their life. I've come to understand that the true focus of our lives is God.
Prioritet u našem životu jeste zapravo Bog. Trenutno oko čega se najviše...
My current focus is on making disciples, disciples who will lead others.
Voditi druge ljude, druga stvar je u srcu koju imam.
Another area close to my heart is worship, teaching people how to worship the Lord and lead worship.
Postoji još jedna stvar koja me dosta dotakla i možda zbog čega sam odlučio.
One more thing that deeply moved me and influenced my decision to leave my business is the issue of children marrying too young.
Znam da
Early marriages often end poorly. We've invested a lot of time helping boys and girls focus on their education so they can find jobs and the right partners later in life.
Školuju, edukuju, jednostavno se bore da dobiju posao, pronađu osobu za svoj život. I ono oko čega se u posljednje vreme dosta razgovara.
Lately, we've also been talking a lot about having suitable spaces. In the past, I didn't think much about it or consider it important. It's still not my top priority, but it has become an important topic. We're praying for spaces where we can hold lectures, work with young people, or even teach foreign languages.
Učenje čak i stranih jezika.